In this presentation, we will be looking at what it looks like to mine or create Bitcoins. And what we know so far is that Bitcoin depends on miners to store and broadcast the blockchain, and to also validate all new transactions. They are also required to vote by hash power on consensus or agreement. And one thing to note is that this is definitely not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of upfront equipment cost, and cost of electricity. So what does it take to become a Bitcoin miner? Well, in its most simplified version, it really only takes 6 steps. You need to join the network and listen for transactions and validate all of those proposed transactions. You listen for new blocks and maintain the blockchain. And when a new block is proposed, you validate it. You then assemble a new valid block with all of the validated transactions. And then you would find the knots or a number that makes your block valid, and then hope everyone accepts your block, and finally, you get to profit. And of all of these steps, the validating and creating new blocks are what the real purpose of the mining is. The rest is just really a reward for being a miner. And what does it mean to find a valid block? Well, the first thing that must be done is gather all of the transactions that are pending and create a block with the correct header. Then you're going to start trying to find the knots or a number that will make the hash of the header be correct. And eventually, after trying enough numbers, the correct knots can be found, and then the block can be announced to the rest of the network. Then, after enough of the nodes accept this block as valid, it will become part of the blockchain. As you can see, all of this is very complicated and it requires quite a bit of computing power. The difficulty is changed every 2 weeks. This is to keep the average time that a new block is found over the entire network to about 10 minutes. Now, we won't go into too much detail on the types of calculations that are needed to be performed during the mining efforts, but you should recall that we previously talked a little bit about SHA-256. But what is this? Well, it's a general purpose cryptographic function that was designed by the NSA, and it currently remains cryptographically unbroken. However, there are some weaknesses that are known, and it's suggested that its security may be kind of weakened over the life of Bitcoin. But right now, it is the strongest available at the inception of Bitcoin. So it is the strongest standard that is used. There is something that is being worked on that could possibly be a replacement, but it is not widely accepted yet and is still under standardization. And on this slide, you can see a representation of how SHA-256 breaks down and compresses the information. Now this is just one part that is actually done 80 times. That is, each time it's completed, it's with just slight changes. So as you can see, it's pretty complicated stuff that requires a lot of computing power. So exactly what kind of hardware is being used for Bitcoin mining? Well, the first generation of miners was basically just your general purpose desktop computer, something that the average Joe would have in his house. And by using that and today's target difficulty, it would actually take over 139,000 years to find one block. So obviously you see there's probably not a whole lot of mining done with your just normal general purpose computer these days. So then in the next generation of mining, people started using graphics cards or the GPU. Most computer processors have a graphics card in it, built in with it, or a GPU, and it's designed for high-speed graphics. Some of the advantages of using a GPU card was it's easy to set up, it's easily available. As I said, most computers have very high quality ones in them now. It has bit-specific instructions written in them already that are very useful, and you can drive several of them from one CPU, one computer processor. Another advantage would be that they're capable of being overclocked or working at a much higher rate than what they are actually designed for. And there's a measure of mining success called goodput. And basically the goodput is going to be your throughput times your success rate. And with this overclocking that we spoke about, oftentimes it comes with some errors. But it was found that it is acceptable to have some error whenever you're overclocking and being able to work twice as fast as what you normally would be. So basically, some errors are okay. You may miss a valid block here and there, but overall, it's going to be okay if you're able to work faster. And as I mentioned, with a GPU miner, you're able to scale up and run several at one time. Because what would be better than running one GPU? How about running 100 of them? But this is going to come with some disadvantages as well. There's poor utilization of the hardware, mainly just for using them for what they're not intended to do. There's poor cooling. They tend to overheat very easily. And when you have several of them running at one time, there's going to draw a large amount of power. And there are very few boards that will hold multiple GPUs. But what kind of mining outcome are we going to get by using a GPU miner? If you have a really good card and you're actually running about 100 of them, it would take about 173 years to find one block. And that brings us to the next generation of mining, which was called Field Programmable Gate Array. And these were designed to have customizable cards that can be tweaked to your liking. They have a higher performance than what a GPU would have. They have better cooling. And as I said, they're extensive customization, so they're able to be tweaked a little bit better. Of course, this type of mining has its disadvantages as well, being that they were often being driven harder than what they were designed for. There were a lot of errors being found. They have poor optimization for 32-bit processing, which, as we know from SHA-256, is what Bitcoin processing is. And there are fewer hobbyists that have sufficient expertise to be able to set them up, program them, and run them easier. They were also a lot more expensive. And because of this expense, it had very marginal performance versus cost advantage over a GPU. Although they worked better, they processed a lot faster, they tend to cost a lot more, and it just kind of negated that advantage. But what type of output would we get from this? Well, again, with 100 boards, it would take you about 25 years to find a block. And all of that brings us up to our more current version of miners. It's the ASICs miner. Now, these were designed to do nothing but mine for Bitcoins. It's the first processor that was designed just for that. You can currently get several different options. And the good thing about these is they are designed to be run constantly for life. So they are actually designed to turn on, let it run 24 hours a day, every day. And one thing to note is it's perhaps the fastest chip development from saying, hey, this is what we need, this is what we're looking for, to actually having it designed, out the door, into customers' homes, and working. Now, at the current difficulty target rate, and the current processors that are in these, it would still take about 14 months to find a block. And of course, as with anything, there are some disadvantages. Most of these boards are going to be obsolete in 3 to 6 months. However, most of your profit is going to be made during the first 3 to 6 months of mining. So therefore, there's a huge push for fast shipping. Unfortunately, that is not actually the case. There are a lot of shipping delays. Most of the places that you can get them require a pre-order. So you pay now. It may ship in 3 to 6 months, which means all of your profit margin is out the door because you should have been mining those first 3 to 6 months. So therefore, most people should actually lose money whenever they first purchase these. The only thing that has really kept that from being true is the rising price of Bitcoin, and that's kind of been their saving grace. And so now what we currently have are professional mining centers. The days of the average Joe just going out and making a ton of money off of mining Bitcoins are over. Not to say that it can't be done, but generally we're going to be in these professional mining centers, we are talking about full-size warehouses just packed full of these ASICs mining machines. Really, the only 3 requirements that you need to have something like this going, other than the machines themselves, is you're going to need to set this up in a place that has cheap power. That's because they're just these machines are going to be drawing a lot of power, a lot of electricity. You obviously need a really good network connection. And you need a cool climate because, as I said, these machines that are constantly calculating, they're running for life. throughout the duration. They're never turned off. That's going to generate quite a bit of heat. So obviously you want a cool climate to help with that cooling process. And that brings us to mining in the future. And there are a few questions that we kind of ask ourselves that we don't really have the answer for completely. As can small miners stay in the game? Are just the average Joe with a desktop computer, is he capable of adding to the Bitcoin network? And do ASICs violate the original Bitcoin vision? And if so, would we be better off without ASICs? So what do we mean when we say that Bitcoin mining uses energy? Well, there are actually three different ways to look at the energy that's being used. And the first one is the embodied energy, or the energy used to manufacture the mining chips and the equipment. And all of this should actually decrease over time due to returns of scale. So basically what that means, the more we get, the farther over time that we go, the more efficient we're going to get at making these. So the cost is going to go down. The electricity that is used during your actual mining or processing, this as well should increase over time, mainly because of returns to scale would be you're adding more computers to it. The farther you go, the bigger you get, the more electricity you're going to use. So that's going to increase over time. The third energy aspect that we use is going to be the cooling. This is required to protect all of your equipment and to keep everything from overheating. Now, as you add to your scale on this, it's going to require more cooling energy. So this is going to increase over scale. So there are a couple of different ways to look at the total energy that is used throughout the entire Bitcoin network. And the first one is called the top-down approach. And what this would be saying is if each block created was worth about $15,000 based on average US price per kilowatt for electricity, we would basically be using 900 megawatts of energy. The other approach is called the bottom up or the lower bound. And this is basically estimating everything based on a more efficient processor. And so if your best claimed efficiency was running at 1 gigahertz, and you have a 150 million gigahertz hash rate, you will be using about 150 megawatts of electricity. Now, this does not include any kind of cooling or embodied energy. This is just processing energy alone. So either approach you use, you can see there is a lot of electricity being used. And another one of these byproducts of mining that we have talked about several times is the cooling. So anytime you use a computer processor, it generates heat. So what can we do with this heat instead of just wasting it and trying to cool it down? Well, one thing that has been suggested is a data furnace. Basically, using a computing device will produce heat almost as well as an electric heater. So why not install some mining rigs as home heaters? Of course, there are going to be some problems and challenges with this. Who actually maintains the ownership and repair on these things? Gas heaters are still at least 10 times more efficient than either a data furnace or an electric heater. And also, what happens in the summertime? Will the network scale down when we start turning these miners off that are acting as heaters because no one wants to heat their home in the summertime? Or will we just find some other way to cool the house down while these miners are running? Now let's take a quick look at the economics of being a small miner. Let's just say that you bought this certain machine, the TerraMiner 4, at a cost of $6,000 US dollars. And the expected time to find a block would be 14 months. So your basic revenue per month on these calculations would be about $1,000 a month. Now that would be great if you actually got that $1,000 every month. However, that's not a guaranteed thing. It's expected that you would find a block in 14 months, but if you'll remember that mining is kind of uncertain. You're not guaranteed to find that. You may actually run the miner for 16 or 17 months before you find a block that you can validate. So how do you get around, or how would a small miner get around that problem of the risk of spending all the upfront cost and possibly not ever finding a block to validate and add to the blockchain? That leads us to our next topic of mining pools. Now, in a mining pool, the pool participants all attempt to mine a block with the same Coinbase recipient. And they send money to key owned by pool manager. And then they distribute the revenues to members based on how much work they have performed. Of course, there is going to be a cut for the pool manager. This acts as kind of a type of insurance. And how do we know how much work is done, each member has done? You're able to use near valid blocks or shares. There are a couple of different variations of the mining pool and how each member is rewarded. The first is pay per share, and there's just a flat reward per share. And in this version, the pool manager actually assumes all of the risk, and therefore there's typically a fairly significant fee that is paid to the managing pool manager in order to be a member. The second one is called a proportional, and this reward is based on you're paid out whenever a block is actually found, and you're rewarded based on the amount of work that was actually performed. The third approach, which is called a Luke Jr. approach, there's actually no management fee that's paid to the pool manager. However, the participants do not get paid until the equivalent of one full Bitcoin is received. So this is basically like a A newcomer to the pool would not be paid for quite a while, but then you also do not have to have any membership fees or anything paid to the pool manager. Now that mining pools have become more popular, there are several protocols that are used to run these pools. Unfortunately, all of these protocols are not all standardized right now. There is a push to have it actually ingrained into the Bitcoin operating procedure, but that has not occurred yet. I should note that some of these protocols are already actually ingrained into some of the hardware, which means that you can buy this particular piece of hardware, go ahead and plug it into your electricity and into the network, and go ahead and start mining those Bitcoins and hopefully start making those dollars. So, as just a little bit of the mining pool history, the first pool actually appeared way back in late 2010, and that was back in the GPU era of mining. And by 2014, around 90% of the network was mining pool based. And in fact, by June of 2014, a certain pool called ghash.io actually exceeded 50% of the network capacity. So with the growing presence of mining pools, are mining pools a good thing? Well, they can be. They allow mining to be more predictable. They allow the small miner to actually participate, and more miners using updated validation software. However, there are some downsides to being a mining pool. It can lead to centralization, which goes against the whole basis of Bitcoin, and it will discourage miners from running full nodes. Now, which leads us to a question of, can we prevent pools? There are also decisions that every miner must make, other than just plugging in a machine and hopefully making money. There are decisions such as which transactions to include in a block. The default is normally any of them above a minimum transaction fee. So if that transaction meets that fee level, then it goes on to the next block. Another decision that must be made is which block to mine on top of. That is actually set as a default as the longest valid chain. Or how about how to choose between colliding blocks? And the default for that would actually be the first block that is heard. And another decision is when to announce new blocks. And that should be done immediately after finding them. That is not always the case, and usually it's for nefarious reasons, something to do some kind of harm or hurt the reputation. So let's talk about what if you as a miner wanted to start implementing some of these decisions that were other than what the default decision should be. How does that work, and is that even capable of happening? And the answer is, it is certainly possible. it is when this happens, it is going to create a fork in the blockchain. And however, this fork will be able to be detected, and you always run the risk of the fork being reversed. Even worse than that is it may crash the exchange rate, which is then going to hurt the profitability of anyone who is working with Bitcoin. So, how do we protect against these forking attacks? One mechanism that is built into the Bitcoin system is called checkpointing. And what this is that all Bitcoin clients that are shipped have a default built-in checkpoint of a version of a blockchain, and it will not accept anything that does not date back to that specific checkpoint. Of course, this does now raise questions about the centralization of Bitcoin, just because it shows that one particular client is in charge of validating what goes back how far. However, it is a good mechanism to keep those deep forks from happening. Another attack on the blockchain is called block withholding tactic. And this is when you don't announce a block when it is first found, and then you keep two of those. You mine and you find two blocks, and you do not announce either of their findings, and you keep those tucked into yourself. And the reason for doing this is, while everyone else is over trying to work on the next, what they think is the next block, you already have the longest blockchain kind of tucked away in your back pocket, and you're working on that, and now you kind of create the next fork and the next blockchain going forward. The reason someone would want to do this would be that while everyone else is working on what they think is the next blockchain, and you are actually holding that and you're working on it, all of the mining and competing is going on by yourself. So you don't have any competition looking for the next blockchain. So when would someone want to attempt a block withholding attack? And the answer would be only if you have a almost 100% guarantee that you are going to win the next block. Otherwise, you would have to kind of do something that would help your chances of winning the next block, which would be working on your network position, straight peer-to-peer, so that you would be able to send out information to people more quickly, or possibly bribery. However, this is a theoretical attack. It has not actually ever been observed in practice. Another type of blockchain forking would be a punitive forking. And this would be basically to punish a certain address. Say that you want to blacklist all transactions from address X. And this is basically to freeze up any of their Bitcoins that can no longer be used. An extreme strategy to do this would just be announced that you will refuse to mine on any chain with a transaction from X. However, a result in this would be if you do not have over 50% of the network, then while everyone else is going ahead and processing these blocks that have these transactions from address X in them, you are no longer on the longest blockchain, and all of the processing and mining you were doing is all for nothing because you're just not getting anywhere anymore. Now, another way to blacklist someone on the blockchain and cut them off would be to announce that you will refuse to mine directly on any block with that address again. But instead of completely cutting them off, you go back to the longest blockchain after a certain amount of blocks. And basically what this will do is keep you from splitting off and mining uselessly. Just sort of prunes that person out for the time being. In this situation, if you are another miner that has heard about this, it may actually be more beneficial to you to join the blacklist so that you are not left out on the short end of the stick or the short end of the blockchain.